Hello, everyone. I'm Kara Stone. I never thought I'd be here, reflecting on my life and relationships like this, but 6 years can change everything, and yet, somehow, nothing at all. I'm 28 now, living in a small apartment that I pay for entirely on my own. I've rebuilt my life from the ground up after everything my family put me through, but before I get into where I am now, I need to start from the beginning. To explain how I got here, I have to go back to when it all started falling apart. I'm the youngest of two sisters. My parents, George and Laura, always had high expectations for me. They weren't the overbearing type of parents who demanded perfection outright, but their expectations were crystal clear. Straight A's weren't applauded. They were assumed. Good behavior wasn't celebrated. It was just the baseline. My older sister, Amy, however, had a different set of rules entirely. Amy was, well, she's always been what you'd call the golden child. She's 2 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, she could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. When I was 8 and she was 10, I brought home a perfect report card, and my parents barely glanced at it. But when Amy got B's and C's, they praised her for trying her best and took her out for ice cream. That's just how it always was. I'd excel, and they'd shrug. Amy would scrape by, and they'd throw her a parade. By the time I was in high school, the favoritism wasn't just obvious, it was blatant. I was the student body president, had a 4.0 GPA, and was part of several extracurriculars. I worked part-time at a local cafe to save for college. Amy, on the other hand, was skipping classes, sneaking out at night, and dating a string of questionable guys. But instead of holding her accountable, my parents doubled down on me. I was expected to keep an eye on her, as if I were the one responsible for her decisions. One incident still sticks in my memory. I'd saved up nearly $2,000 from my part-time job to attend a summer art program at a prestigious university. I was thrilled. It was my chance to bolster my college applications and connect with other aspiring artists. But before I could even submit my deposit, Amy crashed her boyfriend's car. She wasn't supposed to be driving it, of course. My parents sat me down and said they needed my savings to cover the repair costs. "We'll pay you back," they promised. They never did. And the summer program? That opportunity was gone. When it came time for me to go to college, I was determined to make it work, even if my parents' support was conditional. They agreed to pay part of my tuition, but it wasn't out of generosity. They wanted me close to home so I could continue watching over Amy, who was in her senior year of high school. By then, she'd started dating Tyler, a guy with a reputation for trouble. I tried warning her about him, but she brushed me off, saying, "Not everyone wants to be a boring, goody two-shoes like you, Kara." 3 months into my junior year, everything imploded. Amy came home one night and announced she was pregnant. I'll never forget the look on my parents' faces. My mom burst into tears, and my dad just stood there, frozen. Amy, meanwhile, looked defiant, like she was daring anyone to judge her. The father, Tyler, of course. He'd already dropped out of school and had no job to speak of. I thought my parents might finally hold Amy accountable. Instead, they did what they always did. They made it my problem. The next morning, my mom knocked on my door. She didn't even bother to sit down before dropping the bombshell. "Kara, we're going to need your room for the baby," she said, avoiding eye contact. "You need to move out by the end of the week." I was stunned. Move out? Where am I supposed to go? I asked, panic rising in my voice. "You're an adult now," she said. "You'll figure it out. And it'll show Amy you support her during this difficult time." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was 20 years old, juggling a full course load and 2 part-time jobs, and they were kicking me out to make room for Amy and her irresponsible decisions. When I tried to argue, my dad shut me down. Shut me. "We've made our decision," he said, his tone cold and final. "This is what's best for the family." The final blow came the next day. My dad called me into his office and said they could no longer afford to help with my tuition. "We need that money for Amy and the baby," he explained, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "You're smart, Kara. You'll figure something out." That night, I packed my belongings. As I was loading the last box into my car, my dad handed me a piece of paper. "It's a list of women's shelters," he said, "just in case." And with that, he turned and walked back inside. For the next 4 months, I lived out of my car. I parked in Walmart lots, showered at the campus gym, and worked every spare hour I could. My diet consisted of protein bars and coffee. I rarely slept more than a few hours a night. constantly juggling work, classes, and the crushing weight of my situation. I reached out to relatives for help, but no one wanted to get involved. "It's not our place," they said. Despite everything, I refused to give up. Architecture became my escape. I threw myself into my projects, pouring all my frustration and pain into my designs. Somehow, I maintained my GPA, even as I felt like I was barely holding myself together. Not once during that time did my parents call to check on me. Not once did Amy reach out. After graduation, I managed to land an entry-level job at a firm in the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I moved into a tiny studio apartment and worked tirelessly to prove myself. Each promotion felt like a victory, not just over my circumstances, but over the people who had abandoned me. By the time I was 26, I was leading my own projects. My reputation as a designer grew, and I began specializing in sustainable commercial developments. I met Alex, my now fiancé, at a conference 2 years ago. He was presenting on eco-friendly building materials, and I challenged one of his points during the QA session. Instead of getting defensive, he asked me to grab coffee afterward. That coffee turned into dinner, and eventually, a relationship built on mutual respect and support. For the first time in years, I felt like my life was finally on track. I bought a house last year, a modest but beautiful place that I've slowly been renovating. Alex has been by my side through it all, encouraging me every step of the way. He knows my full story, and he's the only person who truly understands the depth of what I've been through. I thought I'd left my past behind me, but last week I got a call that brought it all crashing back. It was my mother, the first time I'd heard her voice in 6 years. "Kara, we need to talk," she said. And just like that, the walls I'd built around my heart started to crack. After the shock of being kicked out of my childhood home, I was thrust into a harsh new reality. For the first few days, I stayed in my car, crying more than I slept. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the stark realization that I was completely on my own. I had been given a list of women's shelters, but pride and disbelief kept me from seeking help. I was an honor student, someone who had worked hard and played by the rules. How had my life spiraled into this? Determined to continue my education, I quickly adapted. My part-time job at the local coffee shop provided a small but steady income. I doubled down on work, picking up night shifts at a nearby diner to make ends meet. The little money I earned went toward gas for my car, protein bars, and an occasional coffee, my only indulgence. I used the gym showers at school to stay clean and spent countless hours at the campus library, not just to study, but because it was warm and safe. Despite the chaos, I clung to my education. Architecture had always been my passion, and immersing myself in my projects became my way of coping. I threw myself into every assignment, often losing myself in the intricate designs and blueprints. The professors didn't know about my situation, and I didn't want them to. I was determined not to let pity define me. However, the strain of my circumstances began to show. Sleep was a luxury, and exhaustion became my constant companion. I remember one particularly grueling week when I worked back-to-back shifts, only to spend my nights drafting designs in the library. On Friday, I fell asleep at my desk and woke up to find one of my professors gently shaking me awake. He didn't say anything about my disheveled appearance, but handed me a cup of coffee and told me to take care of myself. It was a small act of kindness that meant more than he could ever know. While I managed to keep my grades up, the emotional toll was heavier. I couldn't understand how my parents could turn their backs on me so completely. Not a single call, not a single message. It was as if I had ceased to exist in their world. And Ashley, she seemed entirely unaffected by my absence. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned she had given birth to a healthy baby boy. Her life continued as if nothing had happened, while mine was in shambles. For months, I survived on sheer determination. The turning point came when I received an email about a national architecture competition. The winner would receive a cash prize and a coveted internship at a prestigious firm in Boston. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain, so I poured my heart into my submission. I stayed up late perfecting every detail, fueled by a mix of desperation and hope. When the results were announced, I couldn't believe my eyes. I had won. The internship was a lifeline. It offered not only financial stability, but also a chance to build a future I had nearly given up on. Moving to Boston was a gamble, I didn't have any connections or a safety net, but for the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. The transition wasn't easy. My first few weeks in Boston were a whirlwind of adjusting to a new city and a demanding work schedule. I found a tiny, rundown studio apartment that I could just barely afford. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time since leaving home, I had a space where I felt safe. The internship proved to be more rewarding than I had imagined. My mentor, a seasoned architect named Helen, saw potential in me that others had overlooked. She challenged me to think creatively and encouraged me to take risks in my designs. Under her guidance, I flourished. My confidence grew with each project, and for the first time in years, I started to believe in myself again. While my professional life was taking off, my personal life remained complicated. I still carried the scars of my family's betrayal. Despite my success, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was unworthy of love or support. I kept people at arm's length, afraid that if they got too close, they would hurt me just as my family had. Then Nathan entered my life. We met at a sustainable development conference, where he was giving a presentation on green building initiatives. His passion for his work was infectious, and when we struck up a conversation afterward, I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't with anyone else. He listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions and sharing his own experiences. What started as a professional connection quickly grew into something more. Nathan was different from anyone I had ever known. He didn't try to fix me or dismiss my pain. Instead, he supported me in my journey, encouraging me to pursue therapy and helping me see that my worth wasn't tied to my past. With his help, I began to confront the trauma of my family's rejection and take steps toward healing. Life in Boston became a mix of challenges and triumphs. Professionally, I continued to excel, earning a promotion to junior architect and later taking on my first independent project. Personally, I was learning to let go of the bitterness that had consumed me for so long. Therapy helped me understand that my parents' actions were a reflection of their own failings, not my value as a person. 6 years after leaving home, I found myself standing in the backyard of the house Nathan and I had purchased together. It was a beautiful craftsman-style home, and every detail reflected the life we had built. As I stood there watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. My life was far from perfect, but it was mine. I had fought for every bit of happiness I had, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me again. Then, one evening, everything changed. I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, the voice on the other end was one I hadn't heard in 6 years. My mother. She started the conversation as if no time had passed, asking about my life and feigning interest in my accomplishments. For a fleeting moment, I let myself believe she was genuinely proud of me. But then she revealed the true reason for her call. Ashley's life had fallen apart. After a series of failed relationships and more children, she was now pregnant again and struggling to make ends meet. My parents, overwhelmed and nearing retirement, wanted me to move back to Connecticut to help. "You've always been the responsible one," my mother said. "Ashley needs her big sister now more than ever." Hearing those words, I felt a cold anger rise within me. For years, I had carried the weight of their rejection, questioning my own worth. Now, they had the audacity to ask for my help? I couldn't stop myself from laughing bitterly. "Family has to stick together?" I repeated. Where was this family when I was sleeping in my car, working 2 jobs to survive? My mother's tone shifted, becoming defensive, but I didn't let her continue. "You made your choice 6 years ago," I said firmly. "Now I'm making mine. I won't sacrifice my life for Ashley again." And with that, I hung up. For the first time in years, I felt free. The ties that had bound me to my past were finally severed, and I was ready to move forward on my terms. After that fateful phone call, I spent days battling a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, and a hint of curiosity swirled within me. I decided I needed to see things for myself, to face the remnants of a family I hadn't contacted in years. Nathan, ever supportive, insisted on coming along, reminding me that facing this alone wasn't necessary. Reluctantly, I agreed, grateful for his steady presence. The drive back to my hometown felt surreal. Memories of my childhood flooded my mind, blending with the bitter reality of what had transpired over the years. The once familiar roads now seemed foreign, almost hostile. As we pulled into the driveway of my parents' house, I hesitated. Nathan reached for my hand, grounding me. "You're here for answers," he said softly. "You're not obligated to give them anything." My father opened the door, his face a mixture of relief and apprehension. He looked older than I remembered, the years clearly weighing on him. My mother appeared moments later, her usual commanding presence diminished. The tension in the air was palpable as they ushered us inside. The house felt unchanged, as though it had been preserved in time. My old room, however, took me by surprise. Everything was exactly as I had left it. My high school trophies, architecture drawings pinned to the walls, even the books on my desk. It was as if they'd been waiting for me to return all these years. The sight filled me with conflicting emotions: sadness, anger, and a strange sense of nostalgia. My parents wasted no time delving into their plight. My father spoke first, his voice trembling as he recounted the financial burdens they had taken on for Ashley and her children. They had remortgaged the house, postponed his retirement, and were drowning in debt. "We thought we were doing what was best," he admitted, avoiding my gaze, "but we realize now we failed you in the process." It was my mother's turn to speak, and she surprised me by addressing her treatment of me directly. "I thought I was helping Ashley by focusing on her needs," she confessed, "but I see now that I was unfair to you. I'm sorry, truly." The sincerity in her voice was unexpected, but it didn't erase the years of hurt. "Do you think an apology can undo everything?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I lived in my car. I worked myself to the bone while you abandoned me." Nathan placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, a silent reminder to stay grounded. My father reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. "I know words aren't enough," he said, handing it to me. "This is my attempt to document your achievements over the years. It's not much, but I want you to know how proud we've always been, even if we couldn't say it." The journal caught me off guard. Flipping through its pages, I saw notes about my promotions, awards, and even the sustainable design project I had completed last year. The realization that they had followed my career from afar stirred something inside me. It didn't absolve them, but it added complexity to the narrative I'd built about them. Ashley, meanwhile, was still in the hospital, recovering from her injuries. I hesitated to visit her, unsure if I was ready to confront her directly. However, my parents urged me, explaining that she had been asking for me since regaining consciousness. Reluctantly, I agreed. Seeing Ashley was harder than I anticipated. She looked frail, a shadow of the defiant and carefree sister I remembered. She greeted me with a weak smile. "You came," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did," I replied cautiously. "What do you need from me, Ashley?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she spoke about her regrets. She admitted to being jealous of me growing up, feeling overshadowed by my success despite my parents' favoritism toward her. "I didn't know how to handle it, so I acted out," she confessed. "But I see now how much damage I've caused." Her vulnerability caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw not the manipulative sibling who had caused so much pain, but a woman grappling with her own demons. Still, I remained guarded. "Acknowledging your mistakes is a start," I said, "but it doesn't erase the consequences." As I left the hospital room, I felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. Ashley's admission didn't change the past, but it opened the door to something I hadn't considered before, a possibility, however faint, of reconciliation. Back at my parents' house, I found myself staring at the journal my father had given me. Nathan sat beside me, silently offering his support. "What do you think?" I asked him, unsure of my own feelings. "I think they're trying," he said carefully. "But trying doesn't mean you owe them anything. You've built a life you're proud of. Don't let guilt undo that." His words resonated deeply. The life I had rebuilt was hard-earned, and I wasn't willing to jeopardize it. But the journal, Ashley's words, and even my parents' visible regret made me wonder if there was room for some form of connection, a cautious, carefully managed relationship that didn't compromise my boundaries. As the visit drew to a close, my parents made one final request. They wanted my help finding a psychiatric facility for Ashley in Boston, where she could receive proper treatment. They also expressed their intent to move closer, hoping to rebuild their relationship with me while being more involved in Ashley's children's lives. It was a lot to process, and I asked for time to think about it. Driving back to Boston with Nathan, I felt emotionally drained, but strangely lighter. The visit hadn't resolved everything, but it had given me clarity. I didn't owe my family unconditional forgiveness, but I could choose to engage with them on my terms. It was a start, a tentative, fragile start, and that was enough for now. Returning to Boston after the trip to Connecticut, I felt like I was carrying an emotional weight I couldn't quite define. The layers of my family's dysfunction had started to peel back, revealing truths I hadn't anticipated. But amidst the revelations, one thing was clear. I had to figure out what role, if any, I wanted to play in their lives moving forward. Nathan, ever supportive, helped me process everything. He reminded me that my boundaries mattered, and that no one, not even family, had the right to dictate my choices. Over the next week, I focused on grounding myself. Work became my refuge, a space where I felt competent and in control. My team was in the middle of finalizing a significant project, and the demands kept my mind occupied. Nathan's quiet presence was a comfort. He knew when to push me to talk, and when to simply let me exist in silence. "Take your time," he said one evening as we sat on the couch, surrounded by design blueprints. "This isn't a decision you need to rush." But time didn't wait. My parents called a week later, their voices more tentative than I'd ever heard. They updated me on Ashley's condition. She was recovering physically, but her mental health remained fragile. The baby had stabilized but would require continued monitoring. Then they brought up their plan to sell the house in Connecticut and relocate closer to Boston. "We want to be near you," my mother said, her tone careful, "and we think it's time Ashley gets proper help." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I asked for more details about their intentions for Ashley. My father admitted they were overwhelmed by the responsibility of raising her children, while also managing her mental health struggles. They wanted my help in finding a psychiatric facility and setting up a support system for the kids. "We're not asking you to take on everything," he clarified. "We just don't know where to start." After hanging up, I sat with Nathan to discuss their request. He suggested we approach this pragmatically. "You don't have to get emotionally entangled," he said. "Maybe you can help them find resources without compromising your own well-being." His suggestion made sense. It allowed me to contribute without reverting to the sacrificial role I'd played before. The next day, I reached out to my professional network and researched facilities specializing in postpartum and bipolar care. Within a week, I compiled a list of options and shared it with my parents. They were grateful, their voices tinged with an unfamiliar humility. My mother even thanked Nathan, acknowledging his support in ways she never had before. "We're trying to do better," she said quietly. Meanwhile, Ashley's children became an unexpected presence in my life. During a video call, Charlie, the oldest, proudly showed me a drawing he'd made of a house. "It's like the ones you build, Aunt Lauren," he exclaimed. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself smiling despite the emotional complexity of the situation. The younger kids, Eva and Lucas, were more reserved but warmed up as the calls became a regular occurrence. Nathan often joined in, his natural patience and warmth endearing him to them quickly. Watching him teach Charlie how to build a tower with blocks over a video call stirred something in me, a mix of hope and heartbreak. Family therapy sessions began shortly after Ashley's discharge from the hospital. The therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Patel, guided us through difficult conversations. My parents acknowledged their mistakes with more depth than I'd expected, describing their struggles in dealing with Ashley's bipolar disorder and how their guilt had shaped their parenting. "We thought we were protecting her," my mother admitted, "but we ended up neglecting you." Ashley, too, opened up during these sessions. She spoke about the pressure she felt growing up, always comparing herself to me. "I acted out because I didn't know how else to get attention," she said. "But I see now how much damage I caused." Her words felt genuine, but I remained cautious. Words were a start, but actions would determine whether real change was possible. Despite the progress, the sessions were emotionally taxing. Each one unearthed memories I'd buried long ago, forcing me to confront the full weight of my family's dysfunction. Nathan was my anchor through it all, reminding me that healing didn't mean forgetting or excusing the past. "It's okay to care," he said one night as I vented my frustrations. "Just don't lose yourself in the process." By the end of the month, Ashley was admitted to a facility in Boston for intensive treatment. My parents moved into a smaller home nearby, focusing on creating a stable environment for the children. I helped them set up a trust fund for the kids' education, using the money my parents had secretly saved for me. It was a compromise that felt right, a way to support the children without becoming enmeshed in the day-to-day chaos. Through it all, my boundaries remained firm. I made it clear that my involvement was conditional and limited. My parents respected this, a notable shift from their past behavior. They even started seeing their own therapist, addressing patterns that had persisted for decades. As the holidays approached, I faced a new dilemma: whether to invite my family to Boston for a celebration. Nathan encouraged me to consider it, framing it as an opportunity to test the new dynamic in a controlled setting. Reluctantly, I agreed, setting clear guidelines for the visit. When they arrived, the atmosphere was tentative but hopeful. My parents marveled at my home, their pride evident as they admired the architecture and personal touches I'd designed. Ashley, though subdued, made an effort to engage, asking about my projects and even sharing her own ideas for future aspirations. The children brought a sense of levity, their laughter filling the house as they played with Nathan. The visit wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension, reminders of the wounds that hadn't fully healed, but there were also glimpses of something new, a family trying to rebuild on a foundation of honesty and respect. For the first time, I felt like progress was possible, even if it was slow and imperfect. As they left, my mother hugged me tightly. "Thank you for giving us another chance," she whispered. Her words lingered long after they drove away, a reminder that while the past couldn't be changed, the future was still unwritten. The weeks following my return to Boston were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. Between managing my career, navigating the remnants of my family dynamic, and planning my wedding with Nathan, I found myself constantly reflecting on what the future might hold. Could I truly redefine my relationship with my family without losing myself in the process? I threw myself into work as a way to stay grounded. The steady hum of deadlines and project meetings gave me a sense of control amid the emotional chaos. Nathan's unwavering support kept me anchored, reminding me that the life I had built was a testament to my resilience and strength. Yet, despite my efforts to focus on the present, the past kept resurfacing. A turning point came during a family therapy session, the first one where my parents, Ashley, and I were all present. The session was tense but constructive. My father spoke openly about his guilt for prioritizing Ashley's needs at my expense. For the first time, he acknowledged the pain his decisions had caused me. "I thought I was protecting the family," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "But I see now that I failed you." My mother echoed his sentiment, though her words came haltingly, as if she feared saying the wrong thing. "I didn't know how to handle Ashley's struggles," she said, wringing her hands. "And in focusing so much on her, I lost sight of you." Ashley, too, surprised me with her vulnerability. She spoke about her journey in therapy and how she'd begun to understand the ripple effects of her actions. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said, her voice trembling, "but I want to try to make things right. For my kids, if not for me." The session left me emotionally drained but cautiously hopeful. It wasn't a clean slate, it could never be, but it was a start. I left with a clearer understanding of the boundaries I needed to maintain, and a small glimmer of what reconciliation could look like. Over time, my relationship with my family began to take shape in ways I hadn't expected. I remained firm in my decision not to uproot my life in Boston, but I agreed to facilitate Ashley's transition to a psychiatric facility nearby. The process was challenging but necessary, and seeing her begin to stabilize under professional care brought a sense of relief. Meanwhile, my parents took significant steps to address their own issues. My father continued therapy, working to unpack years of emotional repression. My mother, once so rigid and dismissive, began to approach our conversations with humility and openness. They even followed through on their plan to sell the house in Connecticut and relocate closer to Boston, prioritizing Ashley's treatment and the well-being of her children. One of the most significant changes came in how my parents interacted with me. They stopped pushing for more than I was willing to give, respecting the boundaries I had put in place. My father, in particular, went out of his way to rebuild trust, sending me thoughtful updates about Ashley and the kids without expecting anything in return. It was a small but meaningful shift, one that made our interactions feel less fraught. Ashley's children, too, became an unexpected source of healing. Charlie, Eva and Lucas's innocent curiosity and boundless energy reminded me of the good that could still exist within our fractured family. During one visit, Charlie proudly showed me a new drawing he had made of a building he'd imagined, inspired by the designs he'd seen in my portfolio. "Aunt Lily," he said with a wide grin, "maybe we can build it together one day." His words brought tears to my eyes, a reminder of the potential for connection even amid lingering pain. As the months passed, I found myself reflecting on how far we'd come. My wedding was fast approaching, and while I'd initially planned to keep my family's involvement minimal, I decided to extend a gesture of inclusion. My parents and Ashley would attend as guests, but the traditional roles of support would be filled by the friends who had stood by me through everything. It was a compromise that felt right, an acknowledgement of both my past and the life I'd built in its wake. On the day of the wedding, as I stood with Nathan under the arch we'd designed together, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. My family was there, watching from the sidelines, and while our relationship was far from perfect, it no longer felt like a weight I had to carry alone. Instead, it was a part of my story, a complicated, messy part that had shaped me but didn't define me. After the ceremony, my father approached me with tears in his eyes. "You've built something beautiful, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." For the first time, I believed him. Looking back, I've come to understand that healing isn't a linear process. It's messy, filled with setbacks and unexpected moments of clarity. My relationship with my family will never be what it could have been, but it's no longer defined solely by pain and resentment. We found a way to move forward, not by erasing the past, but by learning from it. As for me, I've learned the power of boundaries and the importance of self-preservation. I've learned that it's okay to care about people without sacrificing your own well-being. And most importantly, I've learned that even in the face of betrayal and loss, it's possible to create a life filled with love, resilience, and hope. This isn't a story of perfect reconciliation, but it's a story of growth. And for me, that's enough.